sits.
And what's the desired look?
It's more like, not like boxy, but more structured.
Okay. And then, anatomically speaking, what elements are going to disturb fit in the front of the coat?
Chest.
Yep. So what's the chest doing?
Well, it's curved, so.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we've got that curve there. Remember what we were talking about last time about the curve over our shoulder blade and the difficulties that that's going to produce? Can we remind ourselves and maybe name some? So shoulder blade is creating a mound, yeah? And there's a hollow all the way around it, yeah? Into the center of the spine, into the lateral sort of back side, and even down below it, and then up above it. So what are we getting which might be difficult to fit, which we addressed to the lateral arm, to the back side?
Yeah, like the fabric doesn't lay flat, so just.
Yeah, so it sort of bunches up, yeah? Okay, and then what might we get, we didn't speak about this, we can talk about it, what might we get in the center of the spine, which might cause us an issue as well? Similar thing.
Yes.
Yeah, bit of accumulation of length over that spine. Okay, so if we think about the mound of the chest and analogize it to the shoulder blade, that's going to cause similar issues, right? So we might get, I've got a mound here and a hollow there, right? So what might I accumulate here? A bit of length, yeah. So if I put a rigidity there, that's going to do what? If I build this section out and make it stiff,
Lay flat.
how about over here? Am I going to get issues across the grapevine? Anyone ever seen a bodybuilder wearing a suit? Yeah? What's a classic thing that happens to their garments? Out on the forefronts. They bow out like this, so they've got an excess of length of what we call the grapevine or the bridle. So by creating a mound and supporting that mound, we're going to not just enable the garment to have like a silhouette and a sort of forward chest, we're also going to make sure that all of these elements are sitting into the body in a better way. And you're going to see that we're going to make adjustments to the canvases themselves in order to accentuate those elements. Why do we, so you can see how this has been cut out. I've not got my canvas coming far out this way, have I? Why might I want to stay away from canvassing this area? To an extent. So what's happening over here which I'm wanting to achieve in terms of any ideas? How do I want the garment to look over here? I want it to be waistline. What happens if I put something in there which is going to have a great rigidity to it?
You will get the same shape.
It might take away the shape. It might weigh it down a bit. What I'm going to try and do here is actually shorten this section and try and shrink it in as much as I can. The more I can shrink in, and we're going to use a lot of iron work, the more I can shrink in the waist, the more I can make it look nipped in without actually having the coat reduce cross waist. So if I start adding an element here which is going to potentially add some bulk or some weight to that, I'm going to reduce that likelihood. I put it there so that it's all good. Sorry, my bad. No, my bad. Okay, all right, so you have wet this already, yep, and you've dried it. That was in the last video. If you haven't, give this a good soak, and then go over the iron. So wring it out, and then go over the iron, and then press it out. And if you haven't got time to do that today, just go ahead and make it. Particularly speaking, when we're dealing with a body canvas, am I recording? Yeah. When we're dealing with a body canvas, we don't want this to shrink after it's been added to the coat, and we'll see why in a second. So we're just going to start. So I want a little bit extra over here, so I'm just going to lead that out into the inlay. and I'm going to mark the rough shape. I'm going to leave an excess over here, and I'm going to come out about an inch from the edge of my armhole out there. I'm then going to come back about 1.5 inches in from my dart. That. And I'm going to continue that line down. I'm going to continue that line down, the full part, sort of running down the grain. I'm going to mark that there. Yep. And then I'm going to mark where my wedge is. There. And then I am going to, so on the video I do it slightly differently, but you're welcome to take any other methodology. Mark my break line, mark my button position, and then I'm going to start marking for my neck point, and then my dart. So I'm going to mark for the waist of the dart, and then I've got that line coming down there. Okay, that's the gist of it. So now that you've done that, oh, sorry, I'm going to trim it. I don't need to, I can. So I'm going to leave an excess at the bottom, just a little one. And then I can trim it away. Alright, so now that we've done that, I need to shape the canvas back into this waist over here. So I want, thank you very much. So I want the canvas to follow that line coming down. And I want it to come away from the waist and hit that point. I'm then going to come back out just a little bit for the dart, so that when these 2 points align, they come back to the 1/2 inch difference that's going to come out. This will make sense in a sec. It's all in the video, don't worry, and it's here as well. And then I'm just going to trace my break line in, there, and I'm going to trace my dart in. Yep. So the wedge in my pocket, so that wedge is going to help me get the fore part of the coat to tuck under everyone's belly. Everyone has a propensity to sort of have a little bit of shape here. But I don't want, so we're going to avoid bulk. We're going to avoid getting any elements to superimpose one another. So I'm going to displace the wedge up by 1.5 inches on the canvas so that it doesn't interfere with the wedge that's going to be placed at the pocket. Okay? And I'm just going to recreate the shape of that wedge there. Now that I've done all of this, I can trim the canvas in the shape of the full parts. I'm just going to trim that there. So we don't need to mark everything to the other side. Just to avoid confusion, I'm just going to ask you to mark everything to the other side, so you don't have to remember what it is you are marking, what you're not. And to do that, we're just going to use some pins. So I'm going to mark dart points, there, my break line, there, bottom, my neck point, and I've got my break line coming through here. And also what I'm going to do is make sure that I write down on the cloth side, the side that's going to touch the cloth, simply so I don't make the mistake of making the wrong side of the canvas for the side that I'm producing. So lift that off the board and mark these elements across. That's my break and button. Take these out. Yes. Okay. So trace this back through. I know that that's a ½ inch. You can just trace that in, lift that up, and then 1, 2, break in, and okay. All right. So I know that this is the wrong side of my canvas. That is to say, the side that's not going to be touching the cloth. So I can start building up the canvas in this area. Where's my needle one? Okay, so first thing we're going to add is horsehair.
Yeah.
Yes. Grab our hair and we're going to position it with the same grain as the canvas itself. Now it might be a bit difficult because Eileen's cut them short, so if you can't, you can shift them ever so slightly aside. But what we want to use in the horsehair is a restorative or sort of bounce properties of the hair. So what we don't want is to put it to the side and then for this to be collapsible. We want to use the strength of the hair as much as possible here. So that's that, and then we're going to grab our net and give it a little press as well. So I'll be back in a second. So that's had a good press. I'm ready to add it on. So I'm going to try and get as much of the perpendicular out of this as I can. And I want my canvas to end about 2–2.5 inches up from the break point. So about there, so I can get it as good as that. And I want the horsehair to be hitting the waist of the dart. So I'm going to lay it in about there. Okay. So just to help myself out, I'm going to mark across the break line and cut that so that it makes my life a bit easier. I'm now going to place the horsehair a ½ inch down from the canvas at the top and a ½ inch out from the break line itself. Now I don't want any horsehair coming into the brake line because I want to shrink the brake line and help myself out. Remember we said we're going to be including ironwork into the canvas. Help myself out in forming the shape. So I'm just going to displace it a ½ inch off. And as I go along, I'm going to fix it initially by producing little amounts of fullness in the canvas. So I'm a ½ inch away from the brake line, and as I come along, I'm just going to put that little amount of fullness in. Any ideas why I do that? It'll shrink away a little bit when I iron it, but what's the reason for not making it exactly the same size?
You should turn it inside out.
Is it so it has the like space to kind of move with the body, like the cut?
Not quite. So this canvas is going to be touching the cloth, right? Mm-hmm. And we want it to be absolutely flat, right? We don't want it to have any sort of propensity to bubble up. Okay. What happens if accidentally I make this canvas, this horsehair, a little shorter than the canvas that's below it? It's a really important principle which we're going to talk about a lot. So if I, rather than make this slightly longer, I make this slightly shorter, what does the canvas below look like? So we're not worried about that. It's a good point, but we're not worried about that. If I make, rather than making this longer, I make this shorter, what does this look like? It looks like this. Yeah? If I make the horsehair a little shorter, I'm going to produce bubbling in my canvas. And that's the last thing I want. So this is this principle of layering with relative length. As you're coming along, and we've got the cloth, and then we've got the canvas, and then the horsehair, and then the dumet, we want successive amounts of increasing relative length so that each layer that sits on top is being pushed flush by the one that sits beneath. Yeah? Otherwise, you run the risk of having a canvas which is going to flutter, and then that being visible to the top cloth. Yeah? And then the lining underneath is even more wavy. Yeah? So you can provide relative length by adding bubbles in that way, or you can do it by stretching the layer that sits beneath. So now that we've secured it against the brake line, I'm going to secure it on all the other parts of the canvas. So we're going to come about halfway across from the neck, and I'm going to drag the canvas out this way. By dragging the canvas on top of the horsehair, I'm creating a deficit of length on the canvas, and I'm actually creating a bubble underneath. Yeah? And then as I'm coming along, I'm dragging outwards from the point that I have already canvassed in. So I'm going to be pulling the canvas tight so that the horsehair underneath has a little bit of length in it. Yeah? So we're going to come approximately into the dart. And we're going to come around it and end at the waist. There. Yeah. Last baste, I'm going to put over here, about an inch away from the edge. same thing, we're going to stretch away. Now, I know approximately that my armhole is going to take this shape, so I'm going to try and stay within the boundaries of the canvas. And then I'm going to stay an inch away from the edge, approximately. Into the waist of the dart. Okay. Next thing, I'm going to add my Demet. So this should be cut on the bias. So you want to make sure that it's on the bias for you. So locate the bias. On a twill, the bias is the twill more or less itself. So I need that to be placed. I'm going to trim the horsehair first. So cut it to the same shape. And we flip it over, and we're going to trim it back a ½ inch across here. Across the top. And then I'm going to shape it into the waist. So I know I'm 2.5 inches up from the break line over here, and I need to come down into the waist of the dart, which is there, and then back through. Okay. So now we're going to add our Demet. So I want the Demet to be same grain as, I want the Demet to be on the bias. So I've got my twill weave going across there, and I know that if I follow my twill, that's the bias. Lay that on. Make sure it's covering all of the horsehair. And then flip it over, and then it doesn't move. Okay. So now that that's on, you're going to base over the same lines. So I've got my first line here, which I can just about see there. So I was talking about relative length and saying that we're going to add length in successive layers. In the Demet, we're not going to add length, we're putting it on the bias so that it's completely malleable, and it's going to sort of fall to exactly where I want it to. So it needs to stop there. Okay. Same thing, trim this to the same level. And then over here, we're going to trim it a quarter past the horsehair. Or a good eighth past the horsehair. So you want to start staggering it. So we don't, in general, we don't want any trims to end at the same point, so that they layer and they feather off, so that when you press the coat, nothing creates a potential sheen mark under the iron. And then, because we've trimmed the horsehair back a ½ inch, I know I can trim the dinette back a quarter on the edge. And it'll be feathered. Okay. So now we're going to prep our bridle. So you're going to grab a length of Cilicia, and we're going to grab it. Sometimes the weft is stronger than the warp on Cilicia. On this side it's the warp, so we're just going to grab the warp. And we just need a piece which is going to be about 2–2.5 inches wide, and is going to be the length of our horsehair. And then we're going to cut a few more pieces. We're going to cut, just one more piece for us today. And that's going to be a piece which is going to be, again, a couple of inches wide. And we want it to be the length from our cut to our dart, point plus a couple inches. Okay. So we're going to put our bridle in. So our bridle is going to hold our brake line and it's going to shrink it a little bit. So we're talking about muscly guys wearing suits, the bridles pout, so we want to try and shrink the canvases, bring them back in, and sort of add to this mound that the chest is creating through the dart and through other elements we're going to look at to help us with the fit. So I'm just going to lay that in there. And I'm going to, so again, staggering it, so the edge is just off the edge of the demet, and then I'm going to start stitching it where the horsehair starts, there. And I'm just going to start by tacking it in place. Now, what I want to do is locate where I'm going to need to shrink this in. I don't want to be shrinking it at the neck. I want the canvas to stretch at the neck because I want that to rise into the neck. Any propensity for this to tighten here is going to cause a load of cloth floating there. And I don't want it to start shrinking down close to the belly. That's going to throw a load of cloth at my waist, and I want that waist to look lush. So the only place I need to shrink it is over the mound of the chest. So you can more or less split this in three. You can, I won't bother today, but you can measure that, split it in three. It'll produce something like that. You're going to mark your first line through, and then rather than marking your second line through at that line, you're going to mark it through 1/4 inch past it. And we're going to pull the bridle 1/4 inch, only in this location. So I'm just running the bridle flat in this area. I'm going to hook it in, and then here's where I'm going to pull. Pin that in place, and then distribute that fullness as best I can. Secure it in, and then finish off the top. Again, we're not pulling, we're just laying it flush and letting it fall. And then as we get up to here, approximately where the neck point starts, I'm just going to tack off and tear that away. There. There. Last thing to do before we go to the machine is to cut our dart out. So we've got the dart marked in across over here. Cut it to and cut all the way through. if you'll come over to the machine with me. Round and round. Have you all been taught about thread and industrial? No? Alright, we'll do that first. It's a good idea for you to come off your bananas whenever you can, just because the likelihood of there being needs in the sewing rooms is lesser than there being industrial sewing. So if you enter work, you're able to.
It was quite wide.
So on my way. Alright, so two spools, one to be ready to feed your bobbin all the time, and another to be ready to do your sewing. So bobbin spool, bobbin goes there, and then you literally follow. All machines are slightly different, but they follow the same principles. So if you see a thread guide, pass me one with the sticks. If you see a thread guide, you go through the thread guide. And then if you see a tension wheel, you go around the tension wheel.
Can I get 6 meters?
Now you want the tension on this to be pretty solid. We want it to feel, how do I describe that? I don't know. You'll feel it. You want it. But it needs to feel like it's tugging. Not like it's impossible to pull, but like it's tugging. And then go around it this way, oil it a few times, and then engage it. And before you run your bobbin, lift the foot so that the foot of the machine isn't grinding against the teeth and letting them down.
Yeah, alright, great. I'm appreciate that.
So you would usually leave this just done up, so it's ready for the next person, but someone's going to come and give it a go now. So that needs to feel almost rock hard. And then you're putting it in the bobbin case by following the direction of the thread, the direction of the tongue over here. So this is going to cause a tension in the thread on the bobbin case. So we're coming in and we're coming under the tongue and we're wrapping it through. And that needs to be able to hold its own weight and is permitted to just give a little bit of a fall when you sort of let it tug a little bit. But it needs to be holding itself. If it's not, then you've got a little screw over here and you can tighten it ever so slightly to apply a bit more tension on the thread. So that's good for tension. You then put it back in the machine by placing this tongue facing you and then popping it underneath. And if you're struggling, there's a little window over here which you can open. Then I'm threading the machine, so you'll see thread guides, so you're just going through them, running around. There. And then another thread guide, and another one. Tension wheel. Another thread guide. And when you get to this point, you come under the tension wheel, over this metallic little tongue, under this hook, and then through this tension guide. So again, coming through the tension wheel, over this little metallic hook there, under that one, and then through the tension guide, and through this arm, thread guide, and another, and then you're threading left to right. So this needle's not put in very nicely. You want the groove of the needle to be facing the left side perfectly. And then I can pick up my bobbin, thread there. And then the tension on this, if you lift your foot up over here, the tension on here needs to be slightly akin to the tension on the same. If they're not, you've got room for adjusting them here and over there. Who wants to give it a go?
Looks terrifying. I haven't used it yet.
You're not worried, you're just threading the machine. Yeah. So, are you doing it right?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, what's the first step? Talk us through it. Does anyone want to help that?
Thread guides on the top. With a wheel here.
Then coil around it. Just once. You go all the way around. Yeah. Cute.
There it is.
Alright. And then? No. That's the cutting thread, don't worry about that. So at this point you need to put your bobbin on the machine. So no, don't worry about that. Just spin it round clockwise. That should be enough. Yeah. So you can grab that thread that you've got in your left hand. You can, if you put it around, yeah, or you can do that short. And then I think that thread is passing underneath that. Yeah, bring it up. Yeah. And now what do you want to do? That's fine. Now what do you want to do? Two things. How do we get the bobbin moving? Because right now you're just going to be sewing. Sorry? No? So if you pull the tongue. Yes. Okay, and then second thing you need to make sure that you've done is any hat? Yeah, is it lifted? Okay, so you're good to go. Okay, so we'll stop it there. Great, undo it. So you leave everything except for, yeah, exactly. Fantastic. All right, so now you can thread up your bobbin case. So show us what you're doing. Lift it in the air.
I remember it by when you slot it in, you want to, when you pop it through this part here, you want to be able to pull it and it goes the opposite direction. That's how I remember.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay.
Next thing, and then should do that.
And so on. Great.
Just on the side, you see that spinning away from you.
Okay, all right.
So yeah.
And then pop it in.
Doing.
You should hear a firm click.
I know.
So is the tongue facing you?
Yep.
Okay. So is the needle?
There we go.
Oh, you sure? You're in?
Yes.
Is the needle down or up?
Needles up.
All right. So now you can thread the needle.
Which is
No. You're good there. So you leave that.
leaving that. This one.
Yeah.
So many pieces. Right, and that is what happens starts off.
So if you see a thread guide, go through.
Well, this one has.
Yeah. So you've literally got to thread the poly through the hole. And if you work it from front to back, you'll find it easier.
So there's teamwork.
So work it from front to back so you can see the thread going through. Great. And then no, so just keep working it front to back. It'll be a lot easier for you. Okay, is that correct? Yes. Sorry. Okay, great.
Same one for here.
Yeah. And then
That one spins around.
ooh,
No.
what do you do before you put it in the?
I knew that. And then that comfortably sits in the middle of it. Nice.
Great.
What's that? Nice. Yes. Oh, wait, I have to do this.
No. If you look inside.
Yes.
which way have you gone in? Left. Left or right? If you can't remember which way to go in, have a look at the needle if you're on the machine, and you'll see the groove on the left side. And that's the groove that your thread uses in order to penetrate your foot.
The groove's on the right side.
The groove's on the left side.
No, it's on the right side. Can you feel it? Oh, I see something different.
So if all along this side, you see a tiny little groove.
Oh, yes. Okay. That makes sense. Basically, yeah.
You good?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well done. You can come on. Right. Okay. So we're now going to machine down our bridle. So I'm going to come just off the base so that it's easy for me to undo the base. You never want to be sewing on a base if you can avoid it. And we're almost always sewing just under a number 2. Some machines sort of differ in their sizes, they're not particularly well calibrated, but if they're well calibrated, then you're just under a 2. And then you want to trim your threads while you're at the machine. There, I'm doing my paste on here. Said no. Stay on the base, not stay on the base. And now we're going to close our dart. So we're going to lay our dart over a piece of silicone. Make sure that it covers its full length. There. And we're going to stitch. Oops. Down. So I'm not going to back tack here. I'm just going to leave quite a little bit of length, stitch length over the point of the dart, and I'm just going to stitch it down. And I'm staying a foot's width away from the edge. And I'm just going to back tack. Make sure that's flat. Is great. Now, close that dart. Start it off same point, flat, get your needle in, and then as you're coming into the point of the dart, start bringing it over and close. Make sure you're flat all the way, and that you're nice and closed. And then we're going to further secure it by either using a wave pattern over it or by running zigzag back and forth. So what I want to do is stay, make sure that the solution's flat.
So £2.50.
And go back and forth. Okay, go back on the board. So we're going to fold. So I'm just going to press this flat. That's it. So I'm going to just cut away. Let's do this first. So we're literally just going to baste this bridle down. Make sure it's flat. Cut away the excess solution in. And then we're going to close our wedge, trim away the excess. Very useful. I'm just going to apply the fusible to close this wedge like so. Right, you can come to the machine if you want. Just. Just to secure it in place, I'm going to run a little base around it. Okay, now you're going to pad stitch your canvases. So we're going to split it into 3 sections. You don't need to draw these lines, you can just add them there and there, and middle of the dot. And then just to remind you that all of, we can lay the, keep going before part. So all of this is going to get cut out. So you don't need to pad there. You're just going to pad stitch across like this, all the way down. You're going to start on the middle here and head up. And then you're going to start over here from the middle, head out, and then start this side and head out. And if you're left-handed, you go the other way. What's a pad stitch? It's just what's called a feather stitch. It's a pretty old way of combining layers together and making those layers even more rigid than they are. So just to talk you through it, no knots. You're going to come through. So, there, and then you're going to come maybe as much as 5/8 of an inch down, and you're just going to keep going across. Once you've done your first line, you don't want to be shifting the layers of cloth that are underneath. You want to maintain them where they are. We've added length in some of the canvases intentionally. We don't want to be shifting any of that. I'm going to stay away from my armhole because that may need a little trim. And the next row, you take a bite between the stitches So you get a density of stitch which is greater than if you were not doing that. And you don't want them to be super tight, you just want a little bit of length in the stitch itself. And you keep going all the way up. Looks a bit like that. Yeah. Cute. That's a canvas. You're going to do one last thing for Thursday, and that's to make your undercollar. And there's a video up. I can. So, do you want me to demonstrate it, or do you want to start sewing? There's a video up already which you can refer to, or I can demonstrate it now, whichever you'd rather. I know we've taken some time. I don't want to take away your time sewing. Demonstrate? No. Right, so. That's your melton. That's your collar. Grab these out, but there's your collar pattern. So there's a grain on here. That section is on the bias, and that section is on the straight. It's a bit confusing, but basically that folds over like this, and then that wraps around like here, and then we trim this back to the shape of the notch that we're looking for. Right. So we want this section to be on the bias, because as it curves round, we want it to have a little bit of spring, so that it sits really, really flush of the coat and has this nice sort of scoop into the neck. This section we want on the straight. We don't want that to move because that's a stylistic element. So you're going to lay this on. You can see that this is bias, so you just have to lay your collar on like that and go around it. And this is far too big a collar than one that we need. And the reason why is that it's the only element that's draped on a coat. So I'm just going to run that through. And so your collar canvas is on the bias as well. This is where you're likely to make the mistake of left or right. So just remember which panels you're making. If you made an accident and you're making the left side of the coat or you're making the right side of the coat, just remember this thing goes on the underneath. That folds that way. So if I'm doing this, I'm making a right side collar. Okay? So that there is a right side collar. Do the opposite, i.e. that, if you need the left. I'm making a left side canvas here, so I'm going to do that. Yeah, I'm just going to transfer those lines across. Just going to press that out. Okay, so one wonderful thing about this collar canvas is that it's super pliable when it's wet and when it's hot, and then when it dries it goes really firm and crisp. We're going to use those properties to our advantage. someone out there. So I'm just going to go to the machine. You can pin this down or baste it down because it's only a half collar. I'm not going to bother. And I'm just going to stitch all the way across there. Alright, so what we're going to do is pop a little stitch in here to make sure that we're going to try and shrink the collar on the fold edge. We'll see why in a second. And we're going to pad stitch the rest of the collar down, but not everywhere because it's too big for our purposes. So I trim it back. You're going to use a black thread. I'm using white because fuck it. Oh, I have something maybe. Alright. So your first stitch is going to be a stitch to pull the edge in. So you're going to back stitch across the line. You're going to pull that stitch firmly as you're coming along. So you can see that I'm curling it around my finger and I'm creating a shortness that I'm maintaining with the stitch. Shit. Okay, so I'm going to end here, but let's admit that I've gone all the way through. And you can see how that now wants to curl, and you can see the shortness that it's created. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to pad it, and as you're padding it, you're going to roll it this way. So I've got my collar like this, and I'm going to put my needle through the thickness of the melton, but I'm not going to come all the way through. So if you cut it like that, you can get the needle through the thickness without having to go in and out. And you'll see that I definitely caught it because it's not coming away from my needle, but my needle's not showing through to the other side. And you're going to pad stitch a little smaller than on your canvases. And you're going to keep a ½ inch away from all of the edges. All the way through. So halfway from the edge, come back round. And so on and so forth. All right, I'll stop there. You just keep going all the way, and on the other side. From this side, you're going here and you're curling around. You'll see that it wants to start curling because you created a deficit of length on the melted and an excess on the canvas. That's good for us because it's going to help us keep the collar flush onto the wearer. Once you've done that, you're going to press the collar on this line. I'm just going to fix the collar down for the ironwork. You're not doing this, I'm just doing this so I can demonstrate it. And then we're all going to go over to the iron. If you can all follow me. We want to do is try and get this curl around. So first things first, we're going to hold it on. So that's going to sit like this and form my collar, so I need it to curl this way. So we're going to stretch this edge, stretch that edge, and then get it to lay flush. What I don't want to do is stretch it on this area here. The reason being is that's going to fold into my break line over here, and we know our break line is dead straight. So the collar needs to be straight on that area, but everywhere else needs to start looking a bit curved. Here. You can now see that collar, once it's flush against the neck, and it's going to be lie straight up into the right. If we were to, can you see how I've got a bit of a kick, I've got still a bit of a curve here. Once that straightens out, that produces length on this side. So I'm actually perfectly able to match. Imagine the break line coming all the way here. So I've still got to maybe flatten that out. this is super malleable, so you can shrink away, make things look the way you want them to look. Yeah? Make sense? So that first stitch there, which we were pulling, is helping us create the curve initially, and it's also going to maintain it. What we don't want is for this to start stretching out, because as it stretches out, grows the next step, and makes it shrink all the colors away from the neck. Right? What happens when it follows too curved? Say again? If it's too close. What happens on the other side of the flock when it's too curved? It lifts up. Okay? So we get something which is too tight on the next side, and something which has a desire to curl up and away from the body on this side. If it's too straight, it does the opposite. It starts to get really tight over here to the point where it's causing drag on the coat, and then it slips away from the neck. So when you're drafting collar for shirts, dress, whatever it is, remember the relationship between that curve and the neck. So it sits on. You can get the collar closer to the neck, curving it, and away from the neck. Last point. This is all on the bias, which is quite forgiving for us. You can get this within a bigger window of correctness if you have something here which is malleable. If it's slightly too curved, it doesn't matter because that's going to stretch out just a little bit. It's going to have a little bit of bounce, and that's going to stretch out just a little bit. Yeah? So we're using the specificities of the problem we've got in order to understand. See you on Thursday. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, no. Just remember that that's something that you need to work on.
Just to get it.
Get it absolutely wet, and then the form is good. And then you do it.
So
So it doesn't
it's more.
you just need to tell you to you know the gathering of length that I was doing on the course here? We're going to do that to the canvas against the cloth. So we want to know the length. If we don't do it, and then that length shrinks away, then we're going to mess up the work. So that's why we're going to do it. Yeah? Good.